Yes.
All right, welcome to Thoughts on Talks. We're having a special edition, which apparently started with Reverend Mike in a frozen smile pose. Normally what we do is we talk to Reverend Mike, or I talk to Reverend Mike about his Sunday talk, which, what was the topic yesterday, Reverend Mike? I forgot already.
Ironically, just breathe.
Just breathe. That's why, because it's so like an obvious thing that it just didn't stick with me. So, and you know, breathing has such resonance with today and what we're going through with the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so Reverend Mike invited some friends that I'm excited to have with us. Of course, Reverend Nancy Woods, who's been on our show before, is joining us, and Salaam Thompson, who has been involved in the center in a lot of different ways. But I've only met you, Salaam, briefly, kind of in passing in the middle of a weekday.
Yes,
so I'm glad to have this opportunity to get to know you a bit better. So Reverend Nancy, we discussed off the air before we started that we're going to start with and defer to the wisdom of Reverend Nancy, who's the assistant minister at the Center for Spiritual Living in Granada Hills, where we all are part of that community. So Reverend Nancy, how would you like to start us off on our discussion today about just breathe and what's happening in the world today?
You know, when he brought the topic up, it's kind of like I said, oh, oof. I had to take a deep breath, because I told him, I said, it saddens me a lot because of the issue that's in the paper. And I didn't necessarily, truthfully, I didn't necessarily want to hear more about it. I find myself finding a lot of it is duplications. And I know that we didn't just demonstrate, and a lot of laws were actually written because of the things of the late 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But the laws really didn't change very much. And it's kind of like a mind changed against its will. Is it the same still? So I see the same issues reoccurring over and over and over again. And coming out of that experience, I know that one of the things I felt was that I had to change my mind, because I was not one of those people that enjoyed that harmonious consciousness that Dr. Martin Luther King taught and led. He led lots of groups, and they were quiet and peaceful. And I joined some of them as far as doing it, but I was too angry at that point to stay there. I was much more, I think, in alignment with what I felt the Black Panthers. I felt very angry, but I felt that it was, eventually, I felt it was destructive, because I was doing something that was actually hurting myself more than it was hurting them because of the anger. And I wasn't seeing as much change as I wanted to see.
Is that why you chose Black Panthers?
Well, I was angry because I chose them more because I was angry. Not as much as their philosophical thinking, because a lot of the guys were angry. A lot of them was. But those guys that were leading were not just angry. They were really looking for change and shift.
Sure.
And, but people like myself that came out of the South, I was angry. I was really angry. And I felt like what I was doing was becoming more hostile, and was necessary for my own good. So I had to move away from it.
Okay.
So,
Understood.
yeah, that's great to hear a personal, a story from that period of time. I've only learned about it really from movies and television. And so it's really interesting to me. And so what is it that made this, like, that changed your heart? Do you remember one specific moment or experience that made the shift for you?
I went to a couple of events and I heard some of them talking about people and destruction. And all of a sudden I felt like I came out of the South where the Ku Klux Klan was into killing and stuff. So all of a sudden I felt like I was becoming what I was fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I was about 20, I think I was 21 at that time.
Yeah.
I felt like I was becoming what I was fighting. And I felt like, oh no. And I was coming from a family that did not support what I was doing.
Sure, yes.
Okay.
They did not agree with me. I was the one rebel. So
We like that about you, Reverend Nancy. We like you being a rebel.
So I moved away from it because of that. That was when I was trying to figure out how I can shift myself.
So Nancy, just because I know a little bit of your story, it wasn't, you grew up in the South, but you ended up in New York City when you went to nursing school.
Oh yeah.
Right, so did that have, going from a rural situation to a urban, probably the ultimate urban experience, did that have any effect or influence your thinking, or was it just wrong is wrong?
I would say that when I got to New York, I had mellowed some, so I was able, even in my nursing school, I led the demonstration because they wanted me to press my hair and I had a big old afro.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want me putting a nursing hat on. So
Wow.
I managed to get people to have a sit-in because of that. So they let me graduate with my afro and my hat on top of it.
That's cool.
So I didn't stop. I just kind of shifted how I was doing it. But I was less angry. Just less angry.
Yeah, in martial arts films, they talk about your anger can actually take power away from the focus of what you're fighting for.
Yes.
So yeah. I can see where that would make sense. Reverend Mike, how did you and Salaam meet initially? Was it through the center or some other?
It was in a pickup game of basketball. I was done. No, seriously, it was through the center. Yeah.
Okay.
And Salaam's kind of tough to miss because he's 6'7".
Yes, that's correct.
So anyway, it was great to see him, and he brought his family, and they kept coming back, happily enough. And so let Salaam take it from there.
Yeah.
Yes, that's to the extent of what happened, Malayna. This was Easter Sunday of 2015 when we first come to the center. We've driven by it many a times, and we've always said for years prior to that hey, that's a place we should check out, and somehow or another, life just gets in the way, or you just never get around to it, and we've been to 4 different, spiritual houses of worship. So we've ran the gamut in our family as far as background, as far as you know, what my wife's background is, and what we come together when we raise our children, we expose them to, you know, all of it. And well, I would never want to beat them over the head or beat my family over the head with Islam, is what I practice now. But I at least wanted them to be aware of, okay, what makes daddy tick? Okay, why does daddy think the way he does and do the things he do? And what's his, you know, all-encompassing reasoning behind it? But you know, like, to answer the question, I did keep coming back to the center, suffice to say. And there were many folks who have come to me, and I remember one lady in particular, I won't say her name, and she said, "My, I haven't seen you before." And I'm like, "Well, hell, I haven't seen you either." You know, but even though, and then she said, "Why are you new here?" At the time, I was coming there for 3 years. You know, and I said, you know, we've been here, you know, I mean, but you don't see necessarily what you're looking for, you know, basically. So it's, you know, that happens. You know, I mean, like we operate in our own funnels as human nature. We see people that we have a rapport with. We probably attend extracurricular activities, be it yoga, be it to Reverend Mike's compassionate event that holds dear to his heart, river cleanup, you know, and, you know, you build rapport through extracurricular activity.
Right.
But it just, I'll be brief, I promise, but just giving you a whole exodus, you know, of my thought process. I was raised on the south side of Chicago, area where it's blighted, you know, it's a food desert. The crime is high, and there is a police department that was a station that was right across the street from where I lived. And you would think that, you know, with our proximity to Mission Hills Police Department station, Devonshire Division, you would think that that stands to reason that your crime would tend to be low. Well, I had even closer proximity to my police station right there. I wish I had a Google Maps up at that time. I would show you exactly where it is. And crime still persisted, you know, at an alarming rate. And I saw, you know, these, you know, in our neighborhood, in Inglewood is what it's called. You probably hear it tossed about politically and political football, a discourse and so forth when they say, "What about Chicago?" That kind of thing. And the first time I saw white people was when they pulled up into the parking lot where they were report to work and go to work each day. And then around at 10 o'clock in the morning or so during the summers, mainly when I would notice this, I would see, you know, white civilians pull up and park by our house, go to the police station, maybe take care of a towing issue. Maybe a loved one was locked up, maybe some other, you know, legal issue. And that was the only time I saw white people in the neighborhood, you know, and of course there's the exception because I went to Catholic school from K through 12. And so obviously the Archdiocese of Chicago, a lot of the priests were white, let's say for the exception of the late great Father George Clemens, you know, who passed away, I believe late last year, if not earlier this year, in Chicago. But that was just my distant connection with white. My neighborhood is 93, 95% Black, literally. And so Chicago is one of the most segregated cities, if not the most in the nation. And in each direction, you just huddle in your area. So the effects of redlining and things like that. There's covenant codes that are unspoken where you weren't allowed into this part of town. And if you were, you had to be gone by sundown, that kind of thing. Otherwise, you would either be chased out of there by the locals, or if the police really wanted to, you know, make your day hell for you, they'll pick you up in the squad car and they'll drive you over to a Puerto Rican neighborhood, you know, or a Mexican neighborhood, and let you out and say, "Okay, good luck getting home." And you think this stuff is in movies, this stuff literally happened. So obviously our community had a contentious relationship with the police. How did I cope with that? Okay, growing up as a Catholic, Christian kid through school, and suffice to say that people, particularly Black parents, or mostly Black single mothers in Southside Chicago, when they sent their children to Catholic school, it wasn't because they were enamored with the sacraments, or the learning the rosary, or learning, the Stations of the Cross. They weren't enamored with that. They did that as an antidote to safety, because the public schools, the gangs ran rampant. And I knew a lot of the guys, who would go and come, in the local schools, but my mom, late mom, wouldn't allow me to go there. She kept me Catholic school all the way through. And you go through that process, and even while going through it, something in my heart, even though I appreciate Catholicism because it taught me about a higher being outside of myself. It taught me the essence of my connection to that higher being. And I appreciate Catholicism for laying that foundation, but something was off. Something was off where I kept, looking around at a white Jesus that didn't look like me. And in Catholicism, when we're taught that Jesus is God, and that's no debate, I'm not debating that, but just follow the thought process. Where you're telling me that Jesus is God, that is mathematically means equal to God. And I'm looking at this Michelangelo painting of Jesus, and he's white and I'm Black, and Black is opposite of white. Then what you're telling me is that I'm the antithesis to what Jesus is, which means I'm an antithesis to what God is. And this is how or white supremacy kind of filters its way through psychologically, through education, and through entertainment, and through economics, and through labor, and through law, and through religion, and to sex, and into war. So it's the 9 columns of the chessboard, what we're playing. And so in any of those 9 areas that I mentioned, you can, if you assess it well enough, you'll see that white is looked at favorably and Black is looked at as unfavorably. It's like we're playing, a game of chess, and all the Black pieces I have on my side of the board are all pawns. All the white pieces on that side are all queens. So my movement is restricted in this kind of system. And so, and my mom passed away in August of '88, and I was 12 at the time, not even 13. My father preceded her in death 6 years prior to that. So that, we look at the statistics, I'm not even supposed to be sitting here talking to you. I'm supposed to be in jail. I'm supposed to be strung out. I'm supposed to be, a miscreant or a menace to society. As our society looks to paint and discard incorrigible young Black boys in that way, that they're unredeemable. And I'm here because I have a story to tell that didn't happen to me. I saw it happen to friends of mine, and they're still struggling, with their surroundings and things like that. But for some reason, it didn't happen to me. Why, I don't know. But when I went into high school, at the age I wasn't even 16 yet. It was about a month and a half before my 16th birthday, where some friends of mine in high school, 2 friends of mine, one of them has passed on. And we kind of discovered Islam together, or at least they started introducing it to me. And I've been building and refining and practicing my Muslim faith ever since August of 1991. So we're talking about 29 years, over half my life that I've been, practicing Muslim. And so I think that I have a great pride in that I was able to transcend, my circumstance. But I'd be foolish to think that what I did means that everyone else could. And these kind of talking points are thrown at us because as Black people, right? Because they hold up these uber extreme examples of, why can't you be like Oprah? Why can't you be like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson? You know, I mean, there are only 38 to 40 million Black people in this country. Okay. Oprah and Michael and Magic, not everybody's going to be those people. You know, it's just not so. You know, so what is the antidote for how folks navigate when a system is set up, you know, against you? And then you have the legislative arm in the courts. Then you have the judicial arm, you know, in far as what's passed on paper by judges in Black robes. And then you have the executioner arm, such as your law enforcement, who play a role in keeping this order. You know, so in my community, I had police officers raid our home. And they, when in fifth grade, they saw all of my academic awards on a wall. That white officer looked at me and said, are these yours? I said, yes. He said, okay, whoop. And he took every one of them down during the raid, you know, because he raided our home thinking that we were stashing drugs, even though my mother worked hard every day. You know, so those type of interactions of that nature lay the foundation on the lens in which we perceive law enforcement. Are you here to serve and protect, or are you here as an occupying force, as if the Inglewood area of Chicago is now like Gaza Strip? You know, so I'm here to just kind of share that experience without going too much further, but that's the extent of why I'm here. That's the extent of why Reverend Mike and I have a solid rapport. I get where he's coming from with his journey, to understand his privilege and to be more encompassing. He's already been encompassing, obviously, but he needs someone to convey that to, and you know, he's found that in me. So here I am.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm kind of, I also wonder about, both of you came from different parts of the United States. What brought you to Southern California, and have you found it to be significantly different than other parts of the country? Or is it just maybe, you know, a community to community difference? Just curious.
I think it's an overlap of all of those.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, the climate. You know, so the weather that's ideal here, you know, means that you can have a lifestyle that's equally as ideal. In Chicago, it's grimy. You know, I mean, you grow up, you know, you're poor, you're shut in for 6 months because it's so cold. And then when it gets warm, you're ready to, like, you know, go outside, and, you know, you have to walk down the street with, you know, this kind of mean mug, you know, looking, you know, that kind of thing. That's because it's not so much the person that you're walking past. You got to look at the experiences that person's seen. I saw my first murder when I was 7 years old, right in front of me. You know, I know many cold cases that haven't been solved in my neighborhood because Black bodies aren't given the systemic priority. You know, so I see this. So these eyes that are here in Southern California, if it wasn't for the grace of God, I may not even be sitting here. You know, if it didn't take me to have a goal or a vision or someone to kind of give me a glimpse as to, hey, you can see something better than your surroundings. It's not that I didn't want to be with my people. I love my people, you know, but I knew that we were in a death trap. And a lot of times in our culture, we kind of clown one another when we say, oh, you just trying to go lounge out with the white folks, this, that, and the other. It's bigger than that. I mean, like, everyone wants to live. I mean, if I'm seeing an avalanche like coming down, a big huge snowball coming down this mountain, you know, you can't say, well, if you love me, you're gonna stay here. No, I'm getting the hell out of the way. You know what I mean? So especially if I have the wherewithal to do that, you know what I mean? But I can pass that on to you, say, hey, are you gonna move or are you gonna stay? I'm like, okay, I like life. And what they teach at the center along with any other spiritual practice, that when it's taught correctly, is life teaching. So if it's life teaching, you have to pursue that because you want to pursue life teaching in order to live your best life. And so to answer your question about California, it is different. This is a vast difference from where I grew up. A lot of times people from my background don't get to sit here and have this conversation. And I must say, the same is true that you all from your background won't sit in front of me, people from my background, to have this conversation. And never the twain shall meet. In this society, there's this unspoken rule of leveling up, where in our culture, that when, in order for blacks to have any kind of interaction with whites, they have to transcend their circumstances. They have to transcend their upbringing. They have to transcend their origin from where they come from, because usually when you have these types of engagements with whites as a black person, you're engaging with whites in their shared spaces. Very seldom, or if ever, are you engaging with them in shared spaces that you're familiar with. And so here you have, black people as like a fish out of water, in a sense. So, and so it kind of creates in every facet this kind of weird, two-step dance, like where I got two left feet and he has two right feet, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to move, with one another. So no relationship is going to be perfect, and that's fine. That even when you're working together, and this is the thing that I want the audience to understand, is just because you have black and white at the table talking, it doesn't mean something's going to be said that may make somebody feel uncomfortable, or that may, to an extent, offend the other party. You say, hey, that was kind of harsh, or that was kind of like, I didn't like that. That's not how you're supposed to say it. That's not appropriate. So here's how you should say it. I mean, luckily that my wife is not sitting here. I'm sure she had a whole host of things that she don't like that I did or said to her, but that doesn't take away her love for me and my love for her. That's the nature of relationship. You know what I mean? So we live in a society where we walk on eggshells. We're so PC about everything that it's hard to have that crucial conversation, because we're afraid, we don't know how to negotiate those powder kegs that lie in wait for you. And so, I'm just saying, if we all get our MacGyver skills and come with wire cutters, and just clip that yellow wire, we both will survive. We both will live. We both will learn. We both will go forward and evolve.
I'm listening to him. I think that I've been around a little bit longer, and I've been in this metaphysical philosophy for a long time. So I kind of left a lot of the thinking that I grew up with. I've kind of let a lot of it go, even though I would say I still had a solid foundation. Sure. But my experience has taught me how to see as a deeper level of the society, and how we allow society to imprint on us a certain way of thinking, and that imprint from society is why we create our perception of the world from. And whereas now it seems to me, as I observe the basic foundation of the society that we are living in, it is that power. People are reared, all people, not some, are reared to be the power of looming over. And then that is the general concept, that the one that's in charge, the big man on the street, the big man in the company, the president of the corporation. And those people are loom over the people they work with, instead of being in some kind of a connection in relationships, a human being type of connection. Rather, it's the role model type of connection that we have with people. And so the different ways that how it's taught, it's almost like, and it's one of the reasons why I think Martin Luther King came to conclusion that it wasn't just the Black man that was pinned down. It was all people of the lower economical wealth, because the idea of this role model would allow the person that is at the top to incite the lower level against each other. And that person that's trying to be over, I'm poor and you poor, I'm gonna be over you. And so, and our police is developed and our armies are developed. It's like, I heard one of my, I'm sitting with some officers in the service, and these were majors, colonels that were sitting there, and they were talking about their budget and how are we gonna police the world if we don't have enough money to police the world. And I'm sitting there looking at them and thinking, wow, that's how they are being taught. This is what we're teaching. This is in our culture. So to me, I look at it from the place of, can we shift in how we view each other? Can we view each other from being connected from a different place than being over or empowered to the next being? Can we learn how to relate to another person and not necessarily put them down because of their race, economical status, culture, any of that? Can we learn how to relate to each other because we're both created by the same supreme being, a divine being?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and then how to get that into, so it's not enough that, you know, Salaam and I have an understanding, right? We have to take that understanding then to, you know, the school board and the city council and the police commission, and this is one of the things that I find so perplexing about the situation is it does feel like, as I was saying yesterday, that it is a system problem that is only going to be addressed as each one of us in our communities, you know, starting there and building out, addresses our own prejudices, our fears, our common wants, right? Common security stuff. Like, for instance, I was thinking as I was reading these up on Du Bois, that I'm in my 60s looking this guy up, and I should have been able to pull that out of my 6th grade social studies class.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you hear about, I remember, because I've been thinking about this as the Floyd thing's been going on. You know, we heard about George Washington Carver, right? So we've heard about the Black men who could get us stuff, you know, who benefited us, right? You know, the peanut, all the things they made out of peanuts, and you know, I heard that story, right? But Du Bois was controversial, I'm presuming, in that time frame, because he also linked racism with capitalism and the exploitation that, which is what you're actually speaking to, Reverend Nancy, is the exploit, and what Dr. King was speaking to is the exploitation of this huge this huge group of people who are the working poor.
Yes.
Where most of, particularly then, most of Black Americans live in. The other thing that I was wondering if you could speak to, Nancy, because I think this is important for white folk to know. As we were talking about African American and Black and Negro and stuff like this, and you just kind of said off the cuff, you know, I just think of myself as an American.
Mm-hmm.
I just think of myself as an American, always have. And I thought that that was a very interesting thing, because I don't think most people have really put these two, the obvious point together, that African American families have African descent, and there's only one way that most of them got here, and that was, you know, 300 or 400 years ago. So they are our oldest American families. And I think that point gets lost on people. They were, the slaves at the time of emancipation made up 1/5 of the population of the United States, 20%.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start looking this stuff up, you start to see that this has been a really twisted setup from the start.
That's one of the social media memes I saw. It was a little Post-it note that said, "The system is not broken. It was set up this way."
Yeah.
So we have to create a new system.
Yeah, so
The new paradigm of time.
I've heard the saying that to be African American in this country is to be African without origin and American without privilege. And it's really like poignant, you know, to where we are. I mean, like, we are, by the letter of the law, we are American, you know, but we don't have the privilege, you know, of being American. And Reverend Nancy spoke to the working class divide, you know, earlier, and what Dr. King intended to do prior to his assassination, you know, with the Poor People's Campaign. As he shifted, the last 3 years of his life, he shifted his theme from civil rights to economic empowerment. And that's when he became the most dangerous. That's when he started to look at how the imbalance in housing. He started to look at the imbalances of the war expenditures in Vietnam that was spent, you know, to fight a war in Vietnam, as opposed to fighting poverty at home. Then he looked at the garbage workers and the fact that the disparity between Black farmers and white farmers, and the idea, the bootstrap theory that came up, and how Black farmers weren't getting subsidies. And he was, one of the final speeches, he said, "We're going to Washington to get our check." And that's not the Dr. King that white America is comfortable exploring or really recalling. You know, but to Nancy's point earlier about the working class, back in 1676, there was an event called the Bacon's Rebellion. And Bacon's Rebellion, there was African slaves who, along with white Europeans, they were practicing indentured servitude. And they saw they weren't being, you know, properly compensated. I'm giving you the nutshell version. So the ruling class and aristocratic class in England said, "Hey, you know, we've already pushed all our coins to the center of the table to make this exploration voyage over into the New World, establish the 13 colonies and so forth. Okay, if they overthrow, you know, if they get their way with this rebellion, we lose our investment. It's all about dollars." You know, so what they did was they've inherently, I can say, from a skin standpoint, they deputized, you know, poor whites and gave them something to look down on, even though they didn't give them another nickel. They call that the psychological wage of whiteness. Tim Wise talked about this, and W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an essay in 1935. The name just escaped me, but it's there. You know, but I get it to Reverend Mike, because it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember. But he wrote it in 1935, and it talked about the psychological wage of whiteness, to where now you give me something to look down on you, then that I have the power, and there's the divide right there. And Bob Woodward, in one of his books in the 60s, To Bring It Current, where he quoted Lyndon Baines Johnson as saying something about, if you give that white man, paraphrasing, somebody to look down on, he won't see me taking money out of his pocket every time, when I need to, And so, like, that type of divide and conquer game has gone on for centuries. I gave you a reference to 1676, the late 17th century, and here we are in the early part of the 21st century, still battling the same dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So don't you think that, Malayna, that the thrust of the whole situation is that people learning how to see each other from of a different way of connecting than what they historically have seen each other, because it's their through social positions and stuff. Mm-hmm. This is how we have traditionally connected, but we need to review that and see how we can shift things so that, because we're not going to change all this economical thing overnight.
Not at all, but the acknowledgement is there.
But we can start being able to see the next person as doing the best as they can for where they are, mm-hmm. and allowing them to be there and start working towards how we can help another person or how we can encourage another person. And to me, there are lots of little things that can be done to shift that. But each individual has to start looking from where they are. Like Malayna needs to look from where she is, or Mike might be looking from where he is, or any other person. Start looking at how can I shift. There are many, many things going on, many opportunities and ways in which we can shift physically. But there, most of all, is how can I shift the way I think? And people like Salaam and myself, we have to shift too, because one of the greatest things to me is stepping into the awareness that I am who I am, and I appreciate being who I am, and I am not dependent on any status from a being outside of myself. To me, this is the awareness that I see needed to be stepped into. The awareness to understand that I am not defined by other human beings. I need to know that I am a beautiful, wonderful, and I think that started years ago. I feel like I am a beautiful Black person. I'm intelligent, I'm compassionate, I'm loving, and I don't see where anything can beat that. As far as a being is concerned, and that's how I want to see the other person. But I have to work on myself seeing that other person like that too, because this week I realized that I don't always go there. I want to, but I don't always go there.
Well, and to take that uplifted self-awareness, and then I think what I'm taking away from all of these protests and demonstrations is that is we the people. Mm-hmm. So we have to do more than just go out in the street. We really do have to become, and we have not as a people been doing this, become more politically active to identify, and I really mean it, to identify school board members who are going to make, teaching Black history, not just for 1 month out of the year, but it's just something that gets shared through the course of instruction throughout the year. And the same for Latin instruction as well, that we as a people educate this awareness in our children, and then also work on the systems at the adult level, and identify and promote candidates who support integrated affirmative measures that are
Yes.
people, and I mean it's a huge project. I mean,
And that's, I mean,
it almost needs to be like a GI Bill for African Americans kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It almost needs to be like that. Like,
Say that again?
well, I think really to address the systemic issue, it needs to be something drastic like a GI Bill for
Or a
African
New
Americans,
Deal.
right? So, in other words, support for education, support for home ownership, you know, that kind of thing. That when the GIs came back from World War II, and even still today, now there is there's a copay component to it today that didn't exist in World War II, but something like that is far-reaching, that is, you know, that has a strategy that's years long, that really wants to address it.
And multifaceted too, to address all of the 9 areas that you talked about, Salaam, of all the areas of society, from education to legislation and all the interactions.
Right.
Because you can't make a full systemic change if you're only focusing on one spoke of a wheel.
Right.
You have to look at all the spokes. So we certainly have our work cut out.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, the New Deal was more comprehensive and like dealt with it, but what that did was it widened the wealth gap, or the, you know, to be able to pursue any kind of lifestyle change where, you know, the white started, and then here we are, you know, we're inching along, putting along, and they're in a rocket ship and they gone. So I think the New Deal was that way.
Yeah, and I've noticed too that the rest of the world is looking to America because we're like the grand experiment in democracy and progression. A friend of mine in Denmark was talking about their Black Lives Matter march and posted about it today. And it is a global human thing, this separating each other by how we look or what our status is in society. It's historic. So we're actually like evolving as humans together right now. We're creating a world that works for all of us.
Yeah, it surprised me that some of the countries where I saw the protests weren't traditionally even friendly to Black people. I mean, Greece, it was just 3 years ago where a Black teenager was beaten to death right on the streets of Athens, you know, but yet here they are, they're protesting. You know, Germany, the same thing. It hasn't been particularly friendly to Black people, but here they are, they're protesting. You know, so I guess everyone can turn a new leaf, you know, at the point.
Well, we just have to keep turning the crank at this point and not lose momentum.
Absolutely.
It kind of shows too that the will of the people as a whole is very different than the will of the police or, you know, those in charge. That those in charge are actually a much smaller percentage of what people as a whole, people who are neighbors and friends and communities, what they really want. So now you see people of all ages and colors and races getting together to march together, that it is time to make changes. And it's a beautiful and unprecedented thing, really.
Yeah, it comes down to power inside that's what essentially the definition of democracy is government by the people. And I know I may not look like it, but I'm an avid fan of Westerns. And I can recall Bonanza, you know, and Rifleman, where you had Lucas McCain and the Rifleman, and then you had the Cartwrights. They had a close symbiotic rapport with Sheriff Micah and then with Sheriff Roy Coffey. You know, so anytime that this passed some kind of law that was, they weren't pleased with how they were doing it, they heard about it. Anytime, Marshall Dillon wasn't doing his job in Dodge City, he heard about it. Even the drunks on the street, they came to him, hey, Marshall, didn't do this, that kind of thing. So that kind of model, we've seen it in art before. We've seen it in the construction of police departments and the government before. So even the calls to, when I see the signs that says defund the police or dismantle the police department, it's done like when the rebuttal that you hear is, well, what we're going to replace it with. It doesn't mean that we were in favor of anarchy or of any kind. It just, the assumption when they say that is the assumption is that what's in place all this time has worked, and data has proven otherwise. The effect of protests around the world has proven otherwise, and the systemic effect on Black and people of color has proven otherwise. So clearly a change needs to be done, to where you can have a community policing. I mean, police departments can look like they did in Mayberry, where there was this close symbiotic relationship to Barney Fife. That can happen, but how does that look? Hell, I don't know yet either, but the wheels are turning. But just because we don't know how the possibility can work doesn't mean that we should grant a reprieve for bad and corrupt action to continue. You put that moratorium there, put a stopgap on that, figure out what temporary measures you can put in place until you can undergird it with permanent and sustainable solutions.
And we may have to start small, but we need to know that, make the decision to go down that path and make that change. And if the people bonded together to make the change, and that's why I said each person really needs to start looking at what can I do? And it really is every individual's job to participate. What can I do? And how can I participate? And a lot of people are listing things and putting things out there on what people can do. And if you go on the internet, if you're any kind of technology, smart of any kind, you can find many ways that you can step up and do it, because it must be the whole society that helps make the shift. If the society is making the shift, then rules will change. The police review board used to be citizens. Yeah. That was a very effective tool at one time. Though we had other community things that were effective, and we kind of just did away with a lot of stuff that we started that may be something we can look at and adjust and go back to. But getting each person to start looking at what can I do is where we need to, what I feel is needs to be on the forefront of every individual. What can I do?
Right.
I can see Mike holding, it's like a textbook that Reverend Mike has in his hand.
Book,
my grandmother's hand.
Have you heard of this book? This guy's amazing.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I never read it though.
I never heard of it.
He's a psychologist and sociologist, pretty brilliant. He has a podcast on being, and he and Krista Tippett are going back and forth, and they're having a face-to-face. It was before the pandemic, and he's talking about white body supremacy versus white supremacy. Yeah. And he's talking about getting in the physiology of our body and our reactions and all these other things. And he's even gently calling out Krista, who's, she's a pretty enlightened thinker herself, but, he calls her out in the moment and she owns it in the moment. It's a very powerful podcast. So On Being, Resmaa Menakem. I think it was just last week. And anyway, she has some good guests on there about this kind of stuff. And Anyway. So
I thought you were holding.
I think for white folk, well, all of us need to educate ourselves. You know, one of the memes that I've seen was from an African American woman saying, "Please don't ask us how to learn about race. Get out there. Don't give us any more to do." And I thought about our conversation, Salaam. I'm like, okay, well, let's come up with 10 things, right?
Absolutely.
And I thought about that when Stephanie was sharing it with me. I said, oops, I did it. I did it myself. So anyway, I mean, this is a start. You know, I know Malayna's got it. You got to look out, Salaam. She's good for cooking up little ideas. And
That's wonderful.
So
that's wonderful.
Who knows where this is going to spin off? You know.
Yeah. Well, I thought you were holding up the Stephen Cope book about Dharma and finding your purpose, because that kind of ties with what you were saying, Reverend Nancy, about everybody has to look within and find what they can do. So as each of us connects to what our talents and gifts are and connects it to serving our community and the evolution and creation of this new paradigm of a world that works for all, that we're not doing it just for ourselves. We're not just finding our purpose to make money, which is what society has been telling us all this time.
Right.
We're doing it like in the old Westerns, because that's what's needed in our community. We need, you know, all the different gifts that everybody brings to come together. So, you know, that's what we need to help people find.
I just can't believe that Salam's old enough to remember the Rifleman. Wow.
It must
well, thank God for syndication.
Yeah, and that's another place too.
Malayna, didn't you say? Don't you have another thing that you have to do?
Yes, I do. Do you guys want to keep on chatting, and I'll just quietly step away? Although I hit the record button, I don't know what will happen.
You know what? Why don't we just end it here, and then then Salaam and I, maybe we can put our heads together and get pull something together, and then we'll bring Malayna in. And
sure. Yeah, because we still have to cover solutions as well, or like some sort of a bulleted point kind of a action plan and a framework around it. So.
Well, and then we can all look at this because it is being recorded. We can all look at it, and then.
Right. Yeah, I would like to see what I said anyway.
Right, because we kind of covered a lot of ground and took some time in the introductions, which we wouldn't have to do that the next time out. So.
Sure.
Right. Anyway. So if anybody who's watching has questions, ideas, suggestions, you can send them to Reverend Mike. REV Mike at cslgh.org. He's trying to make me send them to me, but he's got the official cslgh.org email. You know, sign up for the newsletter for Centers for Spiritual Living Granada Hills. I'm sure we'll have updates in that. And keep tuning in on Sunday mornings to see the live stream of the Sunday service, where Reverend Mike shares his talks, and then the next day we share thoughts on his talks. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, Reverend Nancy. Thank you, Salaam Thompson. And we look forward to.
And thank you, Malayna.
Thank you, Malayna.
Thank you, Malayna. Thank you, Reverend Mike, for sending the invitation to me.
You bet. Always, hey, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in 3 months.
I know, it's been a while. So.
My love to the kids and Danny as well.
Sure thing. Likewise to Stephanie for us.
All right, man.
Right,
okay, we're going to stop recording now.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good to see you all.